Hey guys, it's Leah. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new, and welcome to my October wrap up from worst to best. I'm not gonna lie, October I was in a reading slump. It was probably one of the worst reading months I've had all year, or probably for several years. I'm not gonna lie. I still read a handful of books. I still ended up reading 5 books. I also had 1 DNF, so I will also be talking about that. For me, quantity wise, was not that great in comparison to normal months. But out of the 5 books that I did read, I feel like I did really enjoy and love the majority of them. So I can't complain really in terms of the quality of them. This is definitely going to be a shorter monthly wrap up to normal, but I'm not gonna lie, I just want to rant about some of these. I want to rave about some of these. We're gonna get straight on into it. As I said, we did have 1 DNF in October. I don't tend to include a lot of my DNFs in my monthly wrap-ups. It's something that I definitely do want to start doing as we go ahead though, because it was a slower reading month for me in terms of the fact that I was very much in a reading slump. I thought I would include it. So the 1 book that I DNF'd in October, bear in mind I DNF'd this, I want to say about 60% of the way through. It was Haunted Ever After by Jen DeLuca. I initially going into this was so incredibly excited. I love a seasonal read. I love a read that is spooky and a little bit haunting, especially if it's a romance. I love that sort of intertwining of genres, and this is a romance. It is a rom-com where essentially our female main character moves into this really small town, and she doesn't realize that she's moving into the haunted home of this town. It's a home that's been standing for like a century. Everybody in the town is aware of its hauntings. Like, there are literally like ghost tours that come to her house. Obviously initially when she moves in, she doesn't know this is the case. She goes to a cafe and there is a grumpy cafe owner, and things kind of just go from there. I'm not gonna lie, when it came to the romance at the beginning, I kind of knew exactly where it was gonna go. I went into this knowing that it was gonna be a predictable read for me, but I wanted to have fun with it, and it definitely is like a fun book. Going into this, I feel like it was sort of pitched and we were introduced to our main characters, especially when they first met each other, as sort of enemies, or like they really did not like each other. However, their enemies and not liking each other, I feel like lasted for about 3 chapters, and then all of a sudden it was very insta-lovey. I'm not a huge lover of insta-love, but I was willing to look past it, and I honestly just wanted to have fun with this book, so I really wasn't too phased about it. But then there was one scene that was essentially very out of pocket for one of the characters in terms of what they said to the other character, and I knew from that point on exactly where this book was headed. It meant that I instantly knew what the plot twist and the conflict were going to be, and I couldn't be bothered to read it. I just thought that I wouldn't enjoy it, so I DNF'd it. Honestly, I was quite sad about it, and I very heavily did consider just carrying it on just to say that I had read it, because like I said, I was about 60% of the way through, so I'd read the majority of it. But I knew that if I did finish it, it would likely sit at a 3-star read, and considering the fact that I felt like I was heavily starting to enter a reading slump, I didn't want to do that, so I DNF'd this. I don't know, it might have gotten so much better as the book went on and if I did decide to read it fully, but I just couldn't do it. In a reading slump, I was like, no, I need something that's going to actually pick me up and help me. But then the next worst book that I read in October was also a little bit of a disappointment for me. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. It is actually a short story collection, and that is She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark. I absolutely adore Eliza Clark. She is the writer of Boy Parts and Penance, 2 books that for me were near enough 5 stars. I think I rated them both 4.5. Going into this, I was really excited. I was really intrigued to see what her writing would be like in terms of a short story collection, and her writing was fab. One thing about Eliza Clark, I cannot fault her writing. I cannot fault her craft and her talent for writing, and I will continue to read everything that she ever releases. But this short story collection for me didn't really do it. Again, might have been the fact that I was heavily starting to go into a reading slump and it just didn't work, and it did unfortunately disappoint me a little bit. I did end up giving this 3 stars. I really enjoyed a lot of these stories, but equally some of them fell slightly flat for me. What I think Eliza Clark does brilliantly in all of her books is she's not afraid to like say something or to portray something that is very outlandish, oftentimes grotesque. Her dark humor is through the roof, but she always includes heavier topics like grief. I think for me, unfortunately, the main thing with this is that I most likely read it at the wrong time, because I was going into a reading slump. A lot of these books had very heavy topics that I don't think I wanted to read at that current state either. But I cannot sit here and say that I wouldn't recommend Eliza Clark, despite this being my least favorite from her. I often feel like that with short story collections and authors who I absolutely adore when they release short story collections. illustrations. I wholeheartedly love Eliza Clark. I will continue to read everything she ever released. This just unfortunately was my least favourite from her. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Then whilst I was at work, I read a very short book by, again, an author who I absolutely adore, is definitely an auto-buy author for me, and that was Susanna Clark with The Wood at Midwinter. So this is her newest release. It is literally, I want to say, like 60 pages long, and it's not even properly a novel. It is illustrated, it is absolutely beautiful. Like, the cover in general is so foiled and stunning. I definitely do want to get a copy to own because I loved it, and it's one I definitely can see myself rereading. Like I said, it's not really a full-out novel. It has little bits of illustration and then little bits of text. It literally will take you probably about 10 minutes to read, but it was beautiful. I think the illustrations were absolutely stunning. The way that Susanna Clark completely captures you in, like, even this sort of read where it's literally 60 pages. The way that she paints an atmosphere and characters and a dark, eerie vibe while still feeling so incredibly hopeful, she just does so well. If you don't know, Susanna Clark is the author of Piranesi and Mr. Norrell, what is it? Whatever it is. I'll put it on the screen, I can't remember. I have only read Piranesi from her. I do own her other book, but I'm incredibly daunted by it because it is so long, but now I definitely am even more excited to get to it. I really just truly think her writing is astonishing, and despite the fact that this was so incredibly short, I just wanted it to be so much longer. I don't know what it is, but I love novellas and I love stories, and something that feels quite fantastical that is set in a dark forest, which this was. This is also absolutely the perfect sort of novella to read around Christmas. It does mention Christmas quite a bit, so I feel like I am probably going to get a copy and reread it for Christmas, and I just absolutely loved it. I truly think whatever Susanna Clark writes, I will read 1,000,000%. I do need to get to her longer book, even though I'm daunted. Just become utterly obsessed with every single thing that she writes, and the way that she writes, and her imagery and her atmospheres are just perfect. I ended up rating this one 4 stars. We then have another novella that I think is actually quite similar to The Wood at Midwinter, and that is The Butcher of the Forest by Premee Mohamed. I read this in this reading vlog where I really went in depth into my thoughts, so I'm going to keep this as brief as I possibly can without repeating myself. But as I said, this is obviously a tiny novella, and in this we are following our protagonist who lives in a kingdom. Everybody in this kingdom is heavily frightened by the king. Obviously the king also has a couple of children, and then, like, on the outskirts of this kingdom is a dark forest. One day the king's children wander into this forest, and it is very well known that if you wander into this forest, 9 times out of 10 you are not going to return. The forest kind of eats children. Also, the forest is filled with so many mystical beings and so many dangers and dark eeriness, and the atmosphere in this book was incredible. Absolutely had capability of being a 5-star for me. I did end up rating it 4 stars. One of the main reasons that I rated it 4 stars and it couldn't be any higher was, yes, it's a novella and this might be a little bit counterproductive. I wish so badly that this was a full novel. I genuinely do think that if it were a full novel, in terms of the writing style and the characters and the atmosphere, it could have been 5 stars. I really wish we had more backstory from our protagonist and why she made the decisions that she did, why she was the sort of person that she was. The king essentially tells her that she needs to go into the forest and bring back his children, and if she doesn't, he will murder her entire family. So the stakes were quite high in this. I just absolutely loved all of the scenes where we were in the forest. It really felt like anything could happen. There were countless possibilities, and the writing was just absolutely phenomenal and so beautiful and so atmospheric and so eloquent. And again, another one that I feel like I'm definitely going to reread. If you liked The Wood at Midwinter, this is obviously fairly different because this isn't set around Christmas and it is more of text. It doesn't have any illustrations, but if you did like that or vice versa, I would recommend. I just absolutely love this. 4 stars. And then we have the last physical book that I read in October, because the best book that I read in October was one that I read on my Kindle and I do not own, but the last physical book is The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. I heard so many people raving about this, so many people talking about it, like everyone was obsessed with it, and I had no idea why. All I knew was that it was a romance, but it also had a little bit of a magical realism element, which is something that now I'm constantly on the search for. The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston is in my top 2 favourite romances of all time, so as I said, I'm constantly looking for romances that have that sort of magical realism vibe, and this one did it in a way that was so unique. If you have watched The Good Place, if you like The Good Place, you will love this book. Obviously it is fairly different, but it does play on very similar concepts, which was so refreshing to see in a novel because I've never read anything like that before. In this we are following our protagonist Delphi, who is a massive introvert. She has not experienced a lot in her life. She doesn't really have any friends. She's never experienced any romance, and one day she just dies, and when she dies she enters the afterlife, and in the afterlife she meets this gorgeous sexy man who she feels to her soul she has met before. They really hit it off. Their vibe and their energy are unmatched. So despite the fact that she's literally dead and she's kind of dealing with the fact that she's dead now and she's no longer alive, she's thrilled because she's met this sexy man like 30 seconds into the afterlife, which she never experienced on Earth. Then she finds out that he was sent to the afterlife by mistake. So he actually shouldn't even be dead. In the afterlife there is this one character who I absolutely adored and was definitely a massive part as to why I enjoyed this book so much. She loves rom-coms and all she wants is to see a real life rom-com occur. So she tells Delphi that she can go back to Earth as long as she finds the guy that she met in the afterlife and he kisses her within 7 days. If not, then she's bound to the afterlife forever. I felt like the stakes in this were brilliant. I absolutely loved not only the romance, but I loved the characters. I loved there was another character in this that made my heart swoon. Honestly, nearly brought me to tears many times, and that character, if you've read this book you'll know, really reminded me of something to do with The Holiday. The Holiday, the Christmas film, is one of my favourite films, and there was a subplot in this that very heavily reminded me of that, and I loved it so much. It was humorous, it had pop culture references, which normally I'm not a huge fan of. I really do feel like sometimes that is the quickest way to outdate a book, but this did it brilliantly, and actually I wasn't phased by it at all, which I think really speaks volumes. I thought the writing style was brilliant. This was such a page turner. This is definitely one to just binge read, and as much as it was super fun and the romance was super fun and the characters were super fun and just everything about it was fun, it also heavily spoke about grief and mental health, and there were so many themes in this that made the perfect balance. I wholeheartedly understand why the hype for this was so real a few months ago, and I know it's also being adapted. I am so excited to see what the adaptation for this is going to be like. I feel like it has such good opportunity to be absolutely incredible, but the book I adored, and I ended up rating it 4.25 stars. Would very highly recommend this. And then last but certainly not least, the best book that I read in October was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer. This book deeply fascinated me. This was another book that I had seen so many people talking about, but equally I did see a couple of mixed reviews. Some people very heavily loved it and like were so passionate about their obsession with it, and so many people also were very passionate about their dislike for it. So I was very intrigued going into it what side I would fall on, especially because this is a haunted house horror. One thing about me, if there's a haunted house in it, I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna watch it, I'm gonna write it. I am obsessed with the haunted house trope in horror. When I first heard about this book, I instantly put it on my radar. I was like, this is a very high predicted rating for me, but equally I didn't know whether I was really going to enjoy it all that much. As much as I want to sit here and tell you the synopsis to try and convince you to read it, I really do think that this book is best going into knowing nothing. That is exactly how I did it, and I personally was very pleasantly surprised. This book had so many twists and turns. This book had so many plot twists. This book was so eerie and so unreliable. You really did not know, even up to the 80% of the way through mark, you did not know what was happening. You did not know what was true, what was fake, what was real and what wasn't, and I loved that. I also do believe that this novel was initially posted on Reddit as like a forum on Reddit, and that's how it then became published. When I did finish this, I did go on Reddit because there are so many theories out there. Like even when you finish the book, there are so many possibilities of what really truly could have happened. I love an ambiguous story. For me, those tend to be my favorites, which is probably why I rated this so highly, and it was definitely my favorite of the month. I had so much fun. Like literally this book made me stare at a wall for 2 hours straight after finishing it, and then sitting on Reddit for an extra 4 hours reading every single possible theory that could have happened in this story. It was so good. I personally really loved it, and I do feel like I can sometimes be a harsh critic when it comes to haunted house horrors. This one was so unique, so different to so many of the other ones that I've already read, and it really worked for me. So I would highly recommend this one if you are into horror. It was fascinating, it was fun, it is the perfect book for this time of year also, and I ended up rating it 4.5 stars. But yeah guys, those are all of the books that I read in October. Despite the fact it was probably one of the worst reading months that I've had all year, I am still happy with how much I read and what I did read. If you've read any of the books that I also read, please let me know what you thought about them. If any of them are on your radar, also feel free to let me know what is the best book that you read in November. Or if you watch until the very end of this video and you don't really know what to comment any sort of horror emoji, for we used to live here. Of course, I would also love to say that I have very recently launched my Patreon, where we have a monthly book club and a bi-monthly classics book club, and there you can also find exclusive content. We have a besties group chat Discord server, which honestly is making me so happy. The community we already have over there is genuinely filling me with so much joy that I could genuinely cry every time I think about it. We also have live streams, early access, monthly giveaways. I absolutely love this community, and definitely feel free to check it out if you would like to. And equally, thank you so much for just being here and for spending some time with me. I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again very soon with another video.